Hi everybody, happy December 14th. Glad you're here to enjoy some whiskey. Let's get right to the next one on the calendar. This one is from a distillery that we've been to before. It's from Jim Beam Distillery, but it's not Jim Beam, it's not Knob Creek. This time we're looking at Old Grandad Bonded. Old Grandad, as far as I know, has three standard releases. There's Old Grandad, which is, I don't know, some proof around 90, I think, maybe even as low as 80, I forget. There's Old Grandad Bonded, and then there's a higher proof one that I'll talk a little bit more about when we get a little bit further. They might have some rare ones too, limited releases, things like that, but those are the main three. This one for a lot of folks is the sweet spot. It's the first bottle of bond bourbon that we've had on the Advent calendar. The second bourbon that we've had from Jim Beam Distillery. It's the first one we've had from their high rye mash bill. So Knob Creek that we had before, the Knob Creek bourbon, that was presumably from their low rye mash bill, higher corn, lower rye, and some malted barley. Old Grandad is from their higher rye mash bill, so not sure how much corn, but a higher rye percentage, give you a little bit more spice, presumably. So I want to also talk about the Bottled in Bond Act, though. So if you go to a store and you see a bottle of bourbon that has Bottled in Bond, or it could be a bottle of rye too, Bottled in Bond or Bonded, that means something really specific. So way back in the day in the 1800s, when bourbon was fairly popular, but there was little to no regulation of what it could be. People were selling all sorts of things and passing it off as bourbon, or cutting the bourbon with really gross stuff like tobacco spit jars, or like even battery acid in some instances, like some really harmful or really gross stuff. And so if you bought bourbon, which in a lot of stores was actually just sold like, hey, here's a barrel, fill it up, you never really knew what you were getting unless you had been there before, unless you had tried it before and you trusted this person who was selling it to you. So along came the Bottled in Bond Act. I feel like I know the specific year, but I'm not 100% sure. I just know it was in the late 1800s. And the Bottled in Bond Act set forth certain criteria. And if you see a bottle that has bonded or bottled in bond, it was like a guarantee from the distillery and the government, actually, that this was a quality bourbon that met certain criteria. And those criteria are, to be bottled in bond, it has to be aged for at least 4 years. So you're getting a little bit better quality. Still has to be a straight bourbon. And it's aged from distilled spirit from one specific distilling season from one specific distillery. And it is aged under government supervision. I think this has become a lot more lax, but I know even if you go to Woodinville Whiskey down the road for where I am, there's a part of their distillery that says something like bottled in bond, or according to like the Bonded Act or something like that, and it specifies that visitors can't go in there without an escort from distillery staff, because it's supposed to be controlled conditions to make sure that the feds can confirm that this is quality stuff. It's a little archaic now. The Bottled in Bond Act is more of a historical nostalgia, I guess, associated with bourbon, just because I think the market's pretty good at dictating what quality bourbon gets sold and what crap bourbon doesn't these days. The Bottled in Bond Act also required that the proof of the bourbon be 100 or more. There are some bottles I've read that say, it has to be exactly 100 proof. I don't think that's true. I think it just has to be at least 100 proof, and that most bottled in bond bourbons you're going to find by far are exactly 100 proof, presumably because that's cheaper. Maybe, again, it's tying into that history that more bourbons were produced at exactly 100 proof when bottled in bond, when that act meant something. Not quite sure. But in any event, most you find will be 100. I think you can find some over that, though, too. Onto the bourbon itself. Let's smell it, taste it, see what we got.
Hi everybody, sorry for the interruption. I'll have you back to the tasting in no time, but I appreciate all the feedback I've gotten so far on the Advent calendar. This has been a passion project, but it's definitely been a labor of love, and it has been and continues to be a lot of work. So the feedback I'm getting from folks has been really helpful in keeping my motivation going to keep these videos coming out. But I have started to think about what might be next, and there has been a fair amount of interest in something new and something coming after the Advent calendar when things are done. And so for now, I would like to start generating some interest and getting some ideas in smaller scale tastings that we might have throughout the year. I'm curious as to who might be interested in participating in those sorts of things and what sort of ideas you might have, what sort of tastings you personally might be interested in attending and participating in yourself. Maybe we'll do like a full Ardbeg tasting where we try a lot of different ones from them, or across a certain category like peated whiskeys, and we have a different peated whiskey from different distilleries. So toasted bourbons, maybe we'll try toasted bourbons, or finished whiskeys, or some other distillery will try their samples like Makers or something like that. Anything that you would be interested in participating in is something that I want to know about. Feel free to text or get a hold of me in whatever way. I'll try to get everything sorted and to get things planned out a bit in advance so I can give people plenty of notice. These will probably be a bit limited in their spacing, less people than we have now able to participate. So the sooner you can let me know and the sooner you can respond when I put some announcements out there, the better. But stay tuned for that. And again, please let me know what you might be interested in. And with that, I'll leave you to your tasting. Enjoy some Old Grandad.
Let's see what we got here. The first thing I get when I smell it is it reminds me of that Knob Creek. Like there's that like almost leathery sweetness, but then like the spice kind of hits you in the back. Not strong, but I do get like almost like a faint hint of like piney notes from the rye that I definitely don't get from like a Knob Creek. And now the more I smell it, the more that rye spice is kind of taken over what I get from this. Not strong nuttiness, maybe a little bit of like smooth peanut butter. Can't really tell. That's probably just because it's in my head that this is something, that's the sort of note that comes from bean products a lot. So let's give it a taste and see what we get. So up front, I get mainly spice. It's more on the back palate, a little bit on the finish, that I do actually get some of that peanut butteriness. Definitely not as strong as like the chicken cock that we had earlier from Heaven Hill, but it comes about in a similar way, where it's not up front, comes on a little bit later, maybe not as late as the chicken cock. I thought that came more in the finish, and this is coming more in the back palate, and not as strong. Pretty good, I think that's a pretty characteristic bean profile, honestly. And that time I just get more rye spice, not really getting peanut butteriness at all. I don't know what's going on with this one. It's interesting. Maybe my mouth acclimated to that peanutty or peanut buttery flavor, because I know I had it there with the first swig, but now I'm just getting that spice, and it's like, it doesn't feel like alcohol burn. It's just kind of prickly, and it's not super piney like it was before. It's almost maybe a little bit more like peppery, maybe leaning toward baking spice, but not super strong like that. And tad cinnamon, maybe? I don't know. I might just be making stuff up at this point. But I like this. I like this a lot, actually. And this is a pretty good value. Like this is, I think this specific bottle was like 22 or 23 bucks. There are some places that are selling this for closer to 30, but I think you can find this if you do at least a little bit of looking for, like low 20s, which for a bottled and bond bourbon that tastes like this, that is taking a little bit to decipher what's going on there, so it's got a little bit of complexity, that's pretty good. So I'm a fan. I like this stuff a lot. And if you like this a lot too, there are a few ways we can go. If you want to go kind of the obvious way, the one that we've talked about before, where if you like this but you want something hitting harder, something barrel proof, then you want to go in the same brand. Old Grandad 114. It's 114 proof, so definitely quite a bit more kick than this one right here. 7% ABV higher. but same mash bill, just at higher proof. So if that tickles your fancy, if that's what you want, then give this a go. You can get this in a lot of places for less than 30 bucks, which makes this also an incredible value. Give it a try if you like this stuff, but you want something that hits a little bit harder. And I guess the other thing I would advise more than recommend is Basil Hayden. So Old Grandad himself, this guy on the labels of each of these, that actually is Basil Hayden. Basil Hayden is another brand of bourbon from Jim Beam using their high rye mash bill. So it's the same ingredients as this stuff right here, but it costs so much more. Give it a try, see if it's your jam, but if you're looking for value for this mash bill, Old Grandad is definitely the way to go. So I personally will probably stick with a bottle of 1 or 2 of these on my shelf if I can, for the foreseeable future. Well, I hope you liked Old Grandad. I hope you liked this video, and I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow for the next one. Cheers.